Longtime Bellator veteran Michael Venom Page debuted in the UFC with a win over Kevin Holland. Though he didn't get the finish, he won on all the judges' scorecards 29-28. I want to know your grade 1 through 10, A through F, whatever, on MVP's debut as a whole. Because we saw him on the embedded when he landed in the 305 and then everything he did, the media that he did, right? The one-on-one stuff, the press conference, the weigh-ins, the walkout, his fight, his post-fight. What did you guys think of all that as a whole? We'll go to Big John, someone who knows MVP very closely.
If you're going to give him a grade, I'm going to give him a B+ because everything that he did as far as media and the promotion of the fight and talking about the UFC and building, hey, how great they've been treating him and all these good things. He was phenomenal at doing that. He came into the cage, and what people need to realize is when you go from one promotion to another, there is a difference. It's a difference in just the familiarity with what's going to go on in the back and how things are done. It's just a different feel. And it doesn't mean that you're not being treated good at both. It's just different. And I knew that MVP would have nerves getting into that UFC cage, the octagon, for the first time, even though he's a seasoned veteran. So that would be the one thing that I was going to look at and say, how is he going to react? He reacted well. I could see where he got a little winded, and he doesn't normally get winded, and he got winded based upon nerves, the adrenaline, all of that. You take a look at his performance, it was phenomenal. I think Kevin Holland is just a hellaciously good fighter. He's tough. He's good everywhere. He's got power in his hands. He's got a great chin, and he got just murked in that fight. There was nowhere that he was doing well except for when he was on the ground, when Michael Venom Page made a mistake, went to the ground, and he had his chance, and he landed some good elbows. But in the stand-up, he didn't land anything. He was totally frustrated in the fight. You could see the frustration. He had no idea, and I've heard it from other fighters fighting MVP. They all say, I had no idea how truly fast he was until all of a sudden I was in there. He covers distance different and quicker than everybody else out there. And it's something, if you're not training with a Ray Daniels or a teammate of Michael Venom Page, Norbert Navigny, you're going to have a hard time trying to figure this guy out until you're in there, and then it's a little too late. He did a great job in the fight. The whole Bellator versus, he's an MMA fighter who now fights for the UFC. The real problem for everybody is in the welterweight division, now you got another problem. You got a guy that he is a nightmare to fight. The UFC has a great situation now, and you know what? I think they're going to use it well.
All right, Nolan, what did you think of MVP's debut as a whole? Give it a grade.
Yeah, I give it a B+, A-. I was just really impressed from start to finish, the way he carried himself, the way he promoted himself. I mean, even before he signed the contract, the night before Dana White announced that he had signed with the UFC, MVP posted a promo with him walking up to a table with 2 gloves, one with the UFC and one with PFL. That's all stuff that he's been doing on his own. This Undertaker entrance was something that was his idea, and he put into motion. So great job promoting the fight. I think once he was in there, he gave the widespread audience that maybe hadn't seen him fight before a very good taste of what he brings to the cage. Like Big John said, I think there's plenty of room for improvement as well if he can get that cardio down. But he went in there, he fought a guy that was a ranked UFC fighter. The big criticism about MVP, people had always said, oh, well, he doesn't even take the tougher matchups in Bellator. He doesn't fight the better contenders over there, which if you've followed the last few years, you would know that's not necessarily true. So for him to go in there, beat ranked opposition, a guy who's a bit of a tricky puzzle in himself, and Kevin Holland, and just totally frustrate Kevin. The frustration was visible on his face in that third round. When MVP knocked him over and did that little dance, and Kevin got up, he looked so annoyed at what was going on. That I think that if I'm a UFC fighter, I'm not jumping off grabbing my phone and calling Sean Shelby and saying, hey, I want him next. I think it's going to be tough for the UFC to match make Michael Page going forward, and largely due to the fact that he is a frustrating, tricky puzzle to figure out.
Dude, it's like guarding Michael Jordan. At some point, you're going to get posterized. You're going to be on ESPN highlights, and it's going to be pretty embarrassing. But Nolan, you were there. Tell me what it was like, man. Was MVP getting some love, or was he kind of the enemy because he was coming from another promotion?
No, I think it was all love. If anything, I think there's we talk about the UFC audience or maybe the casual fan. I think when somebody comes in with that level of hype, right? Like, oh, this is the big dog from over there. I've never seen him fight before. Let's see what he's got. We saw the same thing with Michael Chandler. Like, Bellator did such a good job of making both those guys stars in that organization that it's almost very easy for the UFC to just be like, just from the unknown, from the let's see how he does here sort of angle, is just sells itself. And then you add MVP's ability on the mic, his highlight package. I mean, you tune into that, you see all sorts of weird stuff that you've never seen before anywhere else. And then he goes in the cage and he brings some of that showmanship there too. So I think the fans bought into it, and I think they're excited to see where he goes from here as he moves his way towards the title.
You know what's ironic is I think of some great Bellator signings, like Chandler knocked out Hooker, Ben Askren submitted Robbie Lawler, this win right here with MVP over Holland. But let's not fall in love with that, because a guy named Eddie Alvarez came over and fought Donald Cowboy Cerrone. He dropped his first fight, but he became a UFC. You just don't know with the sport. And like Big John says, these are great MMA fighters fighting other great MMA fighters. Embrace them and give them your best and root for them. Let's not have these dividing lines, man. And it's great to have multiple organizations. Gives all these fighters even more chances to be prize fighters, and it's competition for the promotions as well. So I'm glad that he was getting some love. All right, Goes, how about you, man? Give me your grade here. We've heard A-, B+. What would you give him for the whole week?
For the whole week, put everything together, I give him an A-.
Okay.
I think it's kind of interesting when you look at the UFC and the way they do things. You can kind of feel the way they look at a situation when they bring a fighter over, right? Like Ben Askren, we'll give him as an example. He comes over, he gets Robbie Lawler. You're not doing him any favors. Like, you can tell what you're trying to do when you give him a guy like Robbie Lawler. Like, come on, that we can tell the tone of what the UFC wants to do there. With MVP, it's been a little different, man. They've been really welcoming to that guy. They gave him his own entrance, right? I thought that was cool. They gave him vignettes. He had good mic time. The fight itself, it was interesting. You know, I think what he did was he kind of took the home field advantage away from all the UFC fighters. If I am a UFC fighter and I'm going to fight MVP, the first thing I'm asking for is, can we please do it in the Apex? Because I do not want that giant cage and have to chase him around. Like, he really just sucked that home field advantage away from the UFC fighters and put them kind of on blast. He's a difficult guy to figure out. He's fun to watch. And I'll tell you what, he didn't finish Kevin Holland, but if you look up and down that guy's record, you don't have to go very far before you find a absolute devastating KO. So I do not want to be the second or the third guy in line here, because once that guy gets his groove going, he's going to be pretty hard to touch. But the UFC, whatever it is, their recipe, whatever it is to get to the title shot, however many fights it is, for a guy like MVP, I feel like it's going to be one less, just because he's that marketable. He'll have that big of a highlight reel. So if I'm MVP, I really put everything I have into these next couple fights. I think something big can come out of it. I thought it was kind of funny with Dana White's comments towards him. Like, Dana White seems to love him. It's funny because he was praising him for the same things that he was kind of criticizing Kevin Holland for. That's the guy that was in the same cage as him. So I really think the UFC's putting a lot behind him. And when that happens, you know, we were talking about in the first topic, Sean O'Malley, like, look what can happen to some of these fighters. MVP's tough, man. I think he can go a long way. Just got to pick the right matchups.
Goes, you ain't lying. There have been some violent finishes for MVP in Bellator. In fact, John, I think you once told us that the most violent finish, or the one that shook you up the most, was the Cyborg, right? Evangelista, that knee to the forehead, like he crushed his skull.
Look, you're, as a referee, you're used to seeing lumps and bumps and things. You don't ever want to see dents. Okay, and that's what I saw out of the front forehead of Evangelista Santos on that fight. And it's not only that fight. This is the thing about MVP that people are not. MVP has damaged more fighters with one blow than I've ever seen anybody else. Look at what he did. He fought Yamauchi. Right? Yeah, Goichi Yamauchi. A one kick, he destroyed his patella tendon, blew it up off of his kneecap, comes up into his thigh area. You look and you go, who does that? Look at what he did to Derek Anderson. He's done it so many times. If you make a mistake against this guy, he is incredibly dangerous. Kevin Holland got away without getting knocked out, without all that stuff. That would have moved me to that A+ for the week. But look, if there was anything he got away without being truly damaged by MVP, and that's a good night.
Yeah, 36 years of age, but man, that guy's still lightning fast. How he can cover so much ground and still land on someone's jaw is simply amazing. You don't see too many people in MMA that can do what he can do. Guys, who would you match him up against next? Quick round of horn here on that. John, who would you match him up against?
You know, I got to stick with what I've said before in the past. I've always looked at Wonder Boy, Stephen Thompson, and I've said it for years. Boy, I would love to put MVP and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson together because, God dang, it could be just an incredible fight. Now, it could also end up being a stinker where they kind of cancel each other out or not sure about things. I don't think it would. I actually think it would be an amazing fight. So I'm going to go with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson again.
Nolan, what do you think?
I kind of like the idea of Jeff Neal. I think he's like the perfect, not only in the rankings is he the perfect next step up, but I also think his skill set, like Dana said in the post-fight press conference, like we got to be careful how we matchmake him, right? So
Yes.
I think Jeff's clinch work, his little more well-rounded in his attack than Kevin Holland, but he still has what the UFC is looking for, and that's ultimately somebody that's willing to throw down and try to trade with Michael Venom Page as well.
All right. How about you guys? Who would you match him up against?
Well, I think, the thing about MVP is that a lot of people don't talk about is his age. He's starting to get up there, and I think there's no wasting time here. I would say go after a big name, go after Ian Gary. I think the trash talk is going to sell that fight. They're hopefully they don't get into a fight before the fight. Those two are going to want to murder each other, and the fight itself, I think, can be a lot of fun. It'll be really interesting, and it's a win-win for the UFC. Whoever comes out of that would be in a really, really good position. And like I said, I feel like that line is just a little bit shorter for a guy like MVP. Good fight, and Ian Gary's still kind of a younger guy too. Maybe you could take advantage of some things there, but I think that'd be fun.
Ireland versus England. I love it. I was going to throw out Shavkat Rakhmonov, but he seems to be probably next after Malala Muhammad, so just ahead of MVP. But you never know. You never know with the UFC. These are all excellent names.